Let's have a conversation as to whether or not AMD has finally bottomed today out of all days. As we look at the charts for the day, we can see that AMD was up 4.62%. When we look at SMH, which is a major ETF of semiconductors, it had one of its worst days since, maybe since April? And even then, it doesn't seem as though it was down as much as it was down today. So what's up with this relative strength in AMD? And is this a signal to us that we should be buying it? Well, let's dive a little closer. But before we begin, as a disclaimer here, I did buy AMD shares today, 1,000 shares of it. I'm gonna bring that up on the screen right now. I just wanna get this out of the way and show you guys my position. So this is my AMD position here, 1,000 shares at an average cost of 162.05. I do have a daily P&L that is negative, even though unrealized is positive. We'll get to that a bit later in the video, so stay tuned for that. So what exactly happened today, right? Well, when we even compare AMD, let's say, to NVIDIA, obviously a stark difference as to how both of these companies have traded compared to one another since the start of the year. AMD is essentially sideways since the beginning of the year. Maybe up, we could maybe mark it very quickly on the chart here. So what do we have? We gapped down, but we kind of began from over here. So AMD is up, 10% on the year, approximately, right? At the same time, we have, let's say NVIDIA is up, 167% on the year. So it's a very, very big difference between the two. But so how does that even happen? Well, so how this happens is it's not even that surprising. It's usually one of the simplest traps that retail typically falls into, which is retail struggles in chasing stocks that are at the very highs. Okay, if they see a stock being at the all-time highs, they want nothing of it. Instead, they're like, you know what? Let me find a stock similar to that that's lagging, and I'm gonna buy into that. And the issue of that strategy is normally stocks that lag stay lagging. And they lag for a reason. And the chances that you're gonna buy in right at that pivotal point of when it goes back up and it stops being a lagger but starts to outperform is very, very slim, especially because sometimes that never comes about. For example, let's look at this chart of NVIDIA. This is earlier in the year. If I showed you this chart on the stream and I say, hey, look at this breakout that just occurred and we just had all of these weeks of a run-up, would you be a buyer here? Most of retail would not be a buyer. They'll be like, hell no. Look at the stock. It's up, 25% in, like 2 weeks in 2 weeks or so. Why would I be a buyer? Okay, but then the stock rips through, right? And continues to rip through. What about Chipotle? What if I told you, look at this breakout, all-time highs for Chipotle. We ran up a couple days now. Would you be a buyer here? Probably not. You're gonna be like, no, why would I buy at all-time highs? What am I, crazy? Except that it continues to go. On the flip side, if I showed you this chart of PayPal, look at PayPal. It's God knows how far from its all-time highs it's trading right now, right? And the screenshot, 70%. Look at this bounce. Are you gonna be a buyer here? Probably so. You're gonna be like, of course I'm gonna be a buyer. Look how far off the all-time highs it is. Except for the fact that it continues to underperform and ends up hitting a price of $60 today, even though the markets have gone up considerably more since then. So what am I getting at here? Well, AMD has been a household name, especially for retail investors. And since NVIDIA ended up outperforming by so much last year, right? The rally began last year for the most part. Going into this year, a lot of people did not want to chase NVIDIA because they felt that it's already done. The move is done. Let's go after something that has yet to move as much, right? And AMD has been that name, AMD still benefited a bit from that 2023 push that NVIDIA had, right? But, it didn't do as much, as we kind of like come back here. And if we just look at, the whole index here, why not? Let's look at the whole index and we go in from January, right? This is just a whole bunch of semiconductors in here. And here's our 2024. Okay, so we see, right? The first full month, AMD sideways. On the flip side, we see that whole index actually go up. Normally for institutional investors or smarter investors, no offense to anybody here, you see something like that, you see a laggard, you kind of rotate out of it. In this case, people started doubling down, retail started doubling down. It did kind of pay off initially, right? There was a very big euphoric move in AMD going into March. And ever since then, we haven't been able to recover. Now, very often on Wall Street, what they tend to do is they tend to put up pair trades, meaning they will long something and they will short something. They will look to long strength, they will look to short weakness or laggards. Investors that wanted to go long semiconductors and go long the whole AI narrative, they would go long NVIDIA. Obviously, it's been a massive outperformer, and they would look for a name to short, which would be AMD. I mean, that was quite clear even after Q1. But what ends up happening there? Well, if you have that buying pressure going to NVIDIA and then you have that selling pressure going into AMD shorting it, you do start seeing that separation of performance between the two. What you hope to take advantage of one point or another is when the bets begin to get unraveled, meaning those that held NVIDIA within this pair trade are done, they want to take their profits. Well, guess what? That's when they start to cover on their AMD position that was short for them. If we go and we simply, let's look at this. So we could see how much of underperformance AMD has had to NVIDIA since the beginning of this year. Beginning of January, we've gone straight down, right? This is AMD / NVIDIA. We've gone straight down. Finally, today, we see an outperformance occur. And a relatively big bar added too, right? We have seen these bars from time to time. So again, nothing to get too excited about. It could be a one-day thing. But we did put in something nice today. And we could also see that with the SMH, so AMD / SMH. You can see again underperformance by AMD going into today, and then finally some outperformance that did occur. And today's outperformance is pretty remarkable in my opinion, because there was negative news on AMD earlier this week, right? They had a hack that occurred. It affected them on Tuesday, okay? So on Monday there was a bit of a recovery in the stock, which was nice, a reversal. But then the next day we found out about the hack and the stock came in lower. And then suddenly today, which I think happened almost strictly throughout cash hours, which it did, which is very impressive to see, right? You didn't get a gap up or anything. The stock opens up probably flat, maybe a little lower, and just starts on moving. It hits a peak. I think it was up as at 8% or something at its peak. It pulls back. It pulls back because we saw a lot of selling within the tech space today, especially within the semiconductors. So let's just take a look at that. The semiconductors just sold off all day long, as we could see there. At first, the sell-off did not affect AMD. Let's just zoom in a little bit here. We can see we end up hitting this peak in AMD at 11:41 Eastern time, which puts us right there on the index. So we've already come down a decent bit with the index. I mean, we were kind of flat on the day. If you actually look at the closing price here, we gapped up. We were flat on the day when AMD was at the very top. But then during this waterfall here, AMD was also caught up with it. And then when the bottom occurred about 140, we did see a bottom occurred AMD, but nevertheless, AMD did still manage to finish up 4.62%, which is impressive, especially when the strength, NVIDIA, I keep adding that to the wrong side, but especially when NVIDIA had its worst day in quite some time. NVIDIA actually finished towards the lows of the day, almost low-ticked into the close. Just take a look at this here, right? Didn't quite, I mean, actually the close is up here, but still, in the after hours, right now as we speak, NVIDIA is grinding up against that 129 region. Is AMD doing something like that? It's not, right? The after hours of AMD began over here. AMD is actually trading a little higher, which is what we want to be seeing. Now, I'm going to say this. Under most situations, circumstances, you do not want to be buying laggards. For the reason I started this video off, we never know when the turn occurs, if there's ever going to be a turn. The easiest thing to do is always to buy strength and short weakness. That is it. If you stick to that in the stock market, you're going to do so much better, because retail investors have this mantra in their head where they have to be contrarian and they have to buy things at a discount, and if things are too expensive, those are the things that are worth shorting. You know, people were shorting NVIDIA like crazy last year. You know, you don't hear too much of that rhetoric this year because I feel like so many of them got burnt by now, but last year, during this run-up especially here, you know, that's 2024, but during this run-up, my goodness, anywhere on Twitter, people were talking about shorting NVIDIA. And why is that? Because it was just at all-time highs. It moved too much. It moves too much for a reason, okay? So the chances that we're gonna pick the turn here with AMD, whether it's in this pair trade or whether or not there's gonna be flows going back into it because retail investors have finally given up on it. And over the last day or so, I did spend some time on social media. I did notice a lot of retail investors being so upset with the performance of AMD that they were essentially throwing in the towel to a point. I mean, it's difficult to look at your stock that's nearly red every single day while NVIDIA is performing well. It's green every single day, up 2%, 3%. NVIDIA was up 4% plus in the pre-market going into today. But it finished down, what did we finish down here? 3.5%? That's a pretty mighty move there, okay? That's not a bad move whatsoever. Now, it's also worth noting that NASDAQ might have also topped for the time being. We know that the breadth in the market has been horrible for the most part, and NVIDIA has been responsible for so much of the gains within the indices for this year. I think to the point of like 40% of the S&P 500 returns have come from NVIDIA. And it could be that if NVIDIA is finally rolling over here, that we might see NASDAQ coming down. And as there's outflows within the tech space, semiconductor space, it's going to be tough for AMD to fight up against that. That is a headwind that you should be cognizant of if you decide to follow this trade, even though don't follow anybody's trade, okay? This video is not financial advice whatsoever. I'm just giving you my reasoning for getting into today. And the reason why I bring up the retail investors a little bit earlier in regards to kind of throwing in the towel within AMD, well, normally speaking, you know, when a stock exhibits like max pain to the point where a lot of people are giving up on the idea that this is going to be a stock that's going to catch up, that's when it finally happens, right? You might have had a situation where like you've held onto a position, you've gotten sick and tired of it, and the moment you get out of it, boom, the market finally turns in that single direction, right? It happens very often because guess what? When you feel those feelings inside of yourself, because you're human, many people in this world feel those exact same feelings, okay? You have to always be very, I don't want to use the word cognizant again, but you should be very aware of the feelings that you feel within yourself, because very, very likely a lot of other traders out there are feeling it. So you have to understand that, understand why you're feeling that, and see if you can actually use that to your advantage. Now, as of every single trade, you have to have a point at which you get out, right? If I have a thesis that, hey, this was the turning day for AMD, it outperformed on a day that semiconductors had one of their worst days in a while, especially in the video. When does this trade get negated for me, right? It might not mean that it wasn't a great setup. You know, if tech rolls over like crazy, of course, it's gonna be difficult for AMD to keep up. But personally speaking, you know, a close under today, June 20th, would negate this trade, and I would get out of this trade for a loss. I'm gonna keep it as simple as that, okay? I'm putting today as a marker here. I'm definitely gonna get out. Again, you have to have these things in mind. You can't take a trade to the damn bottom. You just can't do that, okay? If you're a trader and not an investor, okay, you can't have money dead for months at a time, right? Who knows? What if NASDAQ rolls over for the next 6 months? What if it pulls back 10% from now and AMD is trading at between 110 and 130 for the next 6 months? Just because you didn't want to take a loss originally, you're gonna stay in it? You know, there's the famous line, it always makes sense. It's one you should always listen to, which is that the first loss is the best loss, meaning take it, okay? It's not gonna get better usually. You know, if you put out a trade on and it doesn't work right away and you see a loss on your bucks, take that damn loss. That's probably gonna be the best loss you're gonna be seeing right there. You hold on to it, all of a sudden you'll be begging to have that loss in front of you again. So you could be taking that as opposed to looking at a loss that's 5, 6, 7 times bigger. In general, tomorrow's gonna be a big day for AMD to watch how it goes. I did say I'll briefly touch on the daily P&L of that $4,300 that's negative. Well, that's because I was short AMD. Guess what? Yes, I was short a laggard. I was trying to short AI that wasn't performing too well. You know, in case there is a turn in the market, and in case there isn't, maybe AMD's not involved in the pair trade that much. So obviously, since AMD turned so much today, I got out of it, and by the time I got out of it, it was up 4% or so. So that's where the loss came from. But yes, I was short AMD for that reason, because I stick almost all the time. I always stick to the idea of buying strength and selling weakness. You're not gonna be seeing me, you know, buying something like Walgreens, right? I'm never gonna be buying Walgreens here, right? A lot of you guys out there might be looking at Walgreens and being like, this is the best buy of the damn century. Hell no. you're not gonna find me buying that whatsoever. I would much rather be buying this chart, Kava. That's where I'd rather be a buyer of, not Walgreens. But that's my video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully I shared some tidbits that make sense to you guys. If you currently hold AMD, just let me know in the comments and at what price you currently hold it at. I'll try to keep you guys updated on the position. Let's hope there's some continuation tomorrow in light if the market's on negative. It's gonna be tough to tell whether or not today was kind of a one-hit wonder type of situation. You know, I'm gonna say this. I would love to be able to short NVIDIA. It's not easy. What I don't like about getting short on NVIDIA just yet is because the market rarely makes it easy for people to make money, okay? It would be a little too simple for people to look at today's candle, see this 3.5% down move from a gap up, and be like, this is the turn, and then the market allows everyone to just get right in and enjoy a 25% retrace in the stock, okay? That's too easy. The market doesn't do that. Can we see a drop of 4% tomorrow? Reeling in more bears into NVIDIA, buying puts, shorting the stock, and then a massive reversal, maybe even ticking into new all-time highs before we finally collapse. That's a much more bigger likelihood, in my opinion, than the stock reversing completely from here on. Now, I could be wrong. I'm just letting you know here. Very rarely does the market make it easy for you to make money, okay? It's going to shove you around. It's going to trick you. It's going to force you out of your position. It's going to trigger your stops. You have to be prepared for that. You have to mentally even envision that happening on the chart. I would love to get short then if we can see this drop in NVIDIA, a recovery, right? Tags maybe a new all-time high, has a harsh reversal. That's kind of where it looks really sweet to get short. But I'll let you guys know if I change my mind. Other than that, good luck out there and have a great day.